Hey everybody, welcome back to Cardinals Uncovered. It's good to see you guys again. I know it's been a while, but been on injury reserve for the last few weeks, but I was designated to return. I'm back, and at this point, I wouldn't believe you if you told me going to week one that Arizona would be 6-4, leading the NFC West by a full game over everybody, and having Kyler Murray in the MVP conversation. What is happening? Did we go to an alternate realm and not know it? I'm totally shocked about this, and I didn't know which is more surprising, the record or the division lead. Let's dive in and figure out how this happened. This is Cardinals Uncovered. We're back, and we're in first place. Well, I am just as haven't been this shocked since I stuck a butter knife in an electrical outlet when I was 4 years old. This is a surprisingly good Arizona Cardinals team we're going to talk about today, but it's really hard to explain how they got there. You look at the four losses they've had. They are to Buffalo, Detroit, Green Bay, and Washington. It shows that there's still some work to be done, but they lost only one score games to Buffalo and Detroit, and those teams currently have 9 wins each. I mean, Buffalo's the one that saved America by beating the Kansas City Chiefs and ending their undefeated season. Detroit's been mashing everybody under the sun. Yeah, Jacksonville was the most recent one, 52-6. So for Arizona to hang in with those two teams in one-score games, it tells you something's brewing here. It's not that bad. It's actually pretty good. It was rougher against Green Bay and Washington. Each of them are 7-win teams, but they had their struggles. They were blown out by 3-4 touchdowns in each of those two games, but there were still some positives to take away from it. Those four teams are a combined 32-9 this season. The Cardinals have 6 wins right now, and they have more wins than 4 of their last 6 seasons when they were completed. The only two that were different, one season that was 8-8, and of course the year they made it to the wild card round and fell flat on their face against the Rams on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But this is what I don't quite get. When you look at it here, you start talking about some of the teams in the league. Arizona hasn't really done anything superbly impressive when you think about it here. Kyler Murray's only thrown for 2,058 yards in 10 games, 12 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. The 3 interceptions is fantastic. It's one of the best, records in the league for a starting quarterback who's been starting every game this season. James Conner's run for just shy of 700 yards on the ground with 5 touchdowns. Murray's been feast or famine on the ground, nearly 400 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. Trey McBride leads the receiving crew of 552 yards, no touchdowns though. Marvin Harrison Jr., 6 scores on 33 catches for almost 500 yards. It's a drop of nearly 200 yards before you find Michael Wilson on that list. And when you take a look at that team, I mean, there's Marvin Harrison Jr. himself right there in practice this week. The numbers aren't gaudy, but they're leading to wins. MHJ has only 2 games of more than 100 receiving yards in his rookie season, and 8 with fewer than 65. There was one game when he got hurt against Green Bay. He took 2 targets, took a shot to the head, took a trip to the blue tent, took a trip to the bench for the rest of the day. So Marvin Harrison Jr. has been doing okay in terms of receiving touchdowns, but the yardage really hasn't been there a whole lot. And that's rather surprising that Arizona still had that success. You talk about McBride there, who has suddenly stepped up and has become one of the better receiving options on the team. Um, Again, 552 yards, no touchdowns yet, but especially in that game against Green Bay, Trey McBride shined very nicely, racking up 96 yards. So when you look at it, it's like McBride has really become the main offensive weapon. Harrison Jr. is still there, but it's really those two guys are more like kind of like 1A and 1B in the offense for this guy right here, Kyler Murray. Again, in practice earlier this week, just running around and getting some more reps in. And all told, it's been not the most electric offense, but it works. It's still a little bit surprising to see they're 6-4, but nobody's really lighting up the scoreboard a whole lot. I mean, this is a team that put up 41 points week 2 against the Rams, but you really haven't seen the big totals that other teams have put up this year. Yeah, we're talking about you again, Detroit. We know, but yet the wins count just the same. Surprisingly enough, the kicking game has been solid this year, and it's one of the bigger reasons why Arizona has actually having success. Matt Prater was 6-6 on field goals before going on injured reserve. Chad Ryland comes in, and he's gone 11 of 12 since then, with his lone miss coming at San Francisco in his first game with the team. Another big key to success that's gone really underreported is the Cardinals have only been penalized 46 times in 10 games this season. That leads the NFL in fewest penalties called. 10 of them have been pre-snap penalties, which are avoidable mistakes, your false starts, things like that. So the yellow flags are staying in the pockets of the officials, which is a really big thing for this Cardinals team, because there have been years past where there's just been flag after flag after flag, and they're either moving themselves backwards and shooting themselves in the foot, or they're giving opponents free first downs with some of the miscues they make on the defensive side of the ball. That is not happening. There is a lot more discipline in this Cardinals team in 2024 than we've seen in years past, and it is helping out a lot. Then you also have to talk about the defense, too. They've gone from bend but not break to suddenly rising up and not allowing a touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. They held the Chicago Bears out of the end zone in a 29-9 win. They held the New York Jets out of the end zone, grounded them 31-6. They didn't allow the LA Chargers a touchdown when they won 17-15 back in week 7. It was 5 Cameron Dicker field goals that accounted for all of the LA points that night. I mean, the cornerback position, which I thought was going to be the Achilles heel of this team in the preseason, has actually looked good. Max Melton, Starling Thomas V, and Garrett Williams have all showed up real nicely this season for Arizona, especially Max Melton being a rookie. He was a second-round pick out of Rutgers, and he's showing that he can play the game with the big guys. That's certainly a real nice surprise, because going in, I thought, well, with Sean Murphy-Bunting and a rookie and a bunch of guys who I didn't even know who they were, and now you've actually got a pretty decent defensive unit that's not getting torn up through the air. You don't see a whole lot of tight ends running wild and wreaking havoc on the Arizona defense like they have in years past. It's like they've really got it figured out over there on the east side of town in Tempe at the practice facility. They know what's going on, and just everything's starting to work better under the leadership of Jonathan Gannon. And I really can't put my finger on one particular thing, but you also have to keep in mind that Budda Baker leads the team right now with 100 combined tackles this season. Again, the defense has been getting it done. I'm still asking myself, though, but how? The one difference I saw came when they won at San Francisco 24-23 earlier this year. It gave Arizona something I haven't seen in a couple years, and that's the confidence knowing they can win close games. The Cardinals are 3-0 this year in games decided by 3 points or fewer. The other difference is the team is working through injuries nicely, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones, big offseason acquisitions, both on IR. Linebacker Dennis Gardeck, also on IR. B.J. Ojulari was lost for the season in training camp. We still have yet to see first-round pick Darius Robinson on the field this season, but he's been practicing this week. Perhaps he's over that calf injury that's kept him off the field, and he might debut against Seattle. And the scary thing is, this team still just keeps on winning. Sure, they're close games, they're exciting games, but it doesn't matter if it's on home field, which three of those wins that we talked about have happened. The other one was on the road at Miami again, another last-second Chad Ryland field goal for the win. The point is, it's not college football; it's the NFL. Just get it done, get the wins, move on, and try and get yourself close to the playoffs. But the road ahead is going to be a little bit tougher for Arizona. They've got 4 divisional games left and 3 others which can pose a lot of challenges. So let's take a look at the schedule here and see what we've got coming up here. The Cardinals start off this week with a trip to 5-5 Seattle. More on the Seahawks in a minute. The one that concerns me is the trip to Minnesota to battle the 8-2 Vikings. Their defense up there in Minnesota is getting it done, allowing 33 points in the last 3 games, all against AFC South teams not named Houston. But the Vikings did beat Houston in week 3, so they actually swept that entire division. After that, Seattle comes here for a visit. Then 3-8 New England comes in. And those are the only 2 home games until the season finale against 5-5 San Francisco. Road trips to 3-7 Carolina and the 5-5 LA Rams are also on the schedule. So we'll break that down a little bit later on here to talk about who potentially wins the NFC West. But for right now, let's go back and let's talk about this week with Seattle and handicap the rest of the season. And when you start talking about Seattle, your conversation really starts and ends with that man right there. That is Geno Smith. When you hear Seattle, you think Pike Place Market and the first Starbucks, which the line is always out the door. I've been there. I know it. And those 2 things are less than 500 feet apart. The Cardinals are 6-13-1 against Seattle in the last 10 years and have not won in Seattle since 2019. They're also 1-5 in the last 6 years coming out of the bye week. So this is probably not really a great situation on paper, but we play football on turf, not paper. So this isn't really a bad thing. And of course, we have to say it that no show is about going to Seattle is complete without talking briefly about the day the Seahawks dump trucked the Cardinals 58-0 in the Emerald City in 2012. And we all thought at that point then head coach Ken Wisenhunt was going to be dropped out of the team plane a la D.B. Cooper somewhere over eastern Oregon in December of 2012 after arguably the most humiliating loss in team history. But back to the present. The real question here is, can Arizona slow down Geno Smith, the quarterback for the Seahawks? In 10 games, he's thrown for 2,781 yards, but only 11 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Now, Smith is 4th in the league in passing yardage, only behind Joe Burrow of Cincinnati, Lamar Jackson of the Ravens, Kirk Cousins of the Falcons, who was anchored by a 500-yard passing game earlier this year, and he's actually more than 100 yards ahead of 5th place C.J. Stroud of Houston. So when it comes to Seattle, you've got to stop them through the air. But what do they do on the ground? Not a whole lot. Seattle's rushed for 915 yards total this season. But can running back Ken Walker III get it going against an Arizona defense that's susceptible to the ground attack? He's also a solid weapon in the passing game. So it's kind of like looking in the mirror and seeing James Conner, but just in a different uniform with an ugly logo and a horrific green color. Jackson Smith and Jigba, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett have been good and consistent performers for the aerial attack for Seattle, each of them having at least 36 catches, 475 yards, and 2 scores. Even more so with Metcalf having missed a couple of games this season due to injury. And the first 2 guys on that list, Smith and Jigba and Metcalf, are 13th and 16th respectively in receiving yards in the league. I mean, overall, Seattle has the 2nd best offense at 260.9 yards per game passing. So this is going to be a real measuring stick for the Arizona cornerbacks to say, what can you do against a very tall physical receiver like Metcalf, a second year player like Smith and Jigba, and Tyler Lockett, who is solid but not spectacular, but has been known to have some really good games against the Cardinals. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out. That said, the Cardinals also come in fifth on the ground at almost 150 yards per game in rushing offense. Only 3 fewer than the offensive juggernaut of Detroit. Yeah, we're talking about the Lions again. And it's just 3 fewer offensive. Yeah, and Seattle is sixth worst against the run, allowing 139 yards per game on the ground. The only teams worse than the Seahawks in terms of the run defense are the Indianapolis Colts, NFC East teams not in Pennsylvania, and the Carolina Panthers. So they're really down there. So the question for this game on Sunday really becomes, which one of these two things is going to be the more driving force? Is it going to be the Cardinals on the ground, pounding it out again, trying to run down the clock and trying to keep this a very close game? Or is the Seattle air attack going to take off? And is Geno Smith going to be running and throwing all over the yard and using all 3 of those receivers to his advantage and getting it done through the air? That is the one matchup to watch for, is Geno Smith against the cornerbacks. So that's what we need to keep our eyes on and see what they can do in terms of the defense. The other question is, can the Cardinals keep bringing the pass rush too? They've been doing better with that lately, but I think they need a bigger effort against Geno because he is more mobile. As to who wins this game, I again can see this coming down to a one-score game at the end, and I really don't know which way it's going to go. Could go out. Honestly, it could go either way at this point, especially with the woes Arizona's had in Seattle, and I really can't even pick this one right now. So instead, let's go ahead and handicap the division. Let's find out what's going to happen when you've got these 4 teams all battling with 7 games left as to who's going to potentially win this division and clinch the title and hold down a playoff berth and a home playoff game. So we know that Arizona has Seattle, Minnesota, Seattle again, New England, Carolina, the Rams, and 49ers to finish out in that exact order. Seattle has Arizona, the Jets, us again, and they host Green Bay and Minnesota before going to Chicago and ending at the Rams. Speaking of the Rams, they host Philadelphia this week on Sunday nights. Then they visit New Orleans, host Buffalo, go to San Francisco on a short week, and then they also take on the Jets before hosting Arizona and Seattle to end the season. The 49ers host Green Bay. They go to Buffalo, which Buffalo in December is brutal to begin with, let alone playing the Bills. And then they host Chicago and the Rams 4 days apart. They go across country to Miami and host Detroit before ending down here in the desert at Arizona in Week 18. It looks like right now, Green Bay, Buffalo, and of all teams, the New York stinking Jets could very well determine the fate of the NFC West this season. Yes, Aaron Rodgers might be a major factor in this thing. It's also worth noting that since 2020, every team with at least 11 wins has made the playoffs. If Arizona goes 5-2 in those last 7 games, they hit 11 wins, and they probably should find a way into the playoffs. I mean, Arizona has to get wins over the weaker teams in Carolina and New England and simply hold their own against the divisional foes. And this is the one advantage the Cardinals have. Arizona has not lost a divisional game this season, already beating the Rams and 49ers once. And that leads to advantages in tiebreaker scenarios. But the question is, who wins this division? I think Arizona, with at least 1 win over Seattle, could take some serious momentum into the final games of the season. I think the Rams have come back together nicely with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp finally healthy, but that schedule is just flat out brutal. Philadelphia is a super tough game. New Orleans with a new coach after a midseason firing there, they're starting to show a little bit of life. Buffalo is always tough, and then San Francisco on a short week. No, thank you. Um, I can honestly see in about 3 weeks the Rams are going to start tailing off here, and before we see them again later this season, week 17, I think the Rams are going to be out of the playoff picture just with the way these next 4 weeks set up for them. It just looks too brutal to overcome. The 49ers have Christian McCaffrey back. He's playing like his old self, which I guess is good if you're a 49ers fan, not if you're a fan of the rest of the division. But, their mile-long injury list is holding them back. And the one game that really stands out to me here is that NFC title game rematch in week 17 against the Lions. Yeah, we're talking about Detroit again. It's a running theme this week. So yeah, I mean, San Francisco Green Bay should be a pretty good game. San Francisco Buffalo, that's going to be a very tough game. The Bears started out okay, but they've fallen apart and have just completely disintegrated. They've also fired coaches up there too. The short week with the Rams can be difficult for both sides. The Dolphins probably have nothing left to play for because they're so far behind the AFC East after the Bills have pretty much run away and hid with that division already. And I said, that San Francisco-Detroit game, that could be a very physical, very difficult game for the 49ers. And there's always a trend that's kind of revealed itself this season that after teams play Detroit, their injury list gets even longer. The Lions are just that physical and that dominant, and that could really damage the Niners' hopes, especially if it comes down to the last week of the season and that game down here at State Farm Stadium. Well, here's what I think about it. It's safe to say this week's game between Arizona and Seattle goes a long way to see who wins the NFC West. I'll go far enough out to say if one of these teams, either the Cardinals or the Seahawks, win both these games in the next 3 weeks, they will win the division. If they split, it still favors Arizona because of the schedule and the tiebreakers. So, with that said, it's definitely been one of those seasons where everyone's kind of clumped up. Nobody's really stood out. Nobody's really jumping ahead here. The question is, who is going to get hot down the stretch? Who's going to win the division? And who's going to be hosting a playoff game? And, even though I'm wearing a certain hat and a certain jersey right now, all the stats are in place. The logic's there, and it all works. Guys, start asking Santa for playoff tickets. I think we're going. Yeah, I really think we are. But speaking of going, we're going to be going out of here right now. And we're going to come back after the Sunday game and see what really happened with the Cardinals in Seattle. Did they wind up, catching the trout that was thrown at them, or did they get stuck to the gum wall in Seattle? We don't know. We will find out in just a couple days here, and hopefully we'll say the Cardinals are 7-4 and they're on their way. But for right now, that's the end of the show. Appreciate you guys watching. It is great to be back, and we'll talk to you next time.